present as before. To everybody, again, good morning. To the jurors, good morning. And again, thank you. At this time, Mr. Chernoff, does the defense have any additional witnesses it wishes to call?
We don't. Subject to receipt of exhibits, we will rest.
Thank you. The defense is resting its case. At this time, Mr. Walgren, do the people wish to present any rebuttal testimony?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may.
Thank you. The people recall Dr. Steve Shafer. May I get him from the hallway?
You may. Good morning, Dr. Shafer. You may take the stand.
Thank you.
Sir, do you acknowledge you're still under oath and still sworn to tell the truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Would you again state your full name, please?
Stephen Lewis Shafer.
Thank you. Direct examination on rebuttal, Mr. Walgren.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Morning, Dr. Shafer.
Good morning, Mr. Walgren.
Dr. Shafer, I just want to go over a few points with you that were raised by Dr. White. Let me first ask you about lorazepam, and I believe you had explained this in your direct examination previously, but if one is to take lorazepam via intravenous administration, you explained to us that it would still, through the process you described with visual aids, enter the stomach. Is that correct?
Correct. Drugs taken intravenously.
Correct is the answer. That remains. The objection sustained. Everything else is straight.
Thank you. Could you just explain the process briefly?
Glad to. Drugs taken intravenously go into all the tissues. They go into the brain, the organs, the muscles, the bones, the intestines, and the stomach, because they flow down concentration gradients to get into all of the tissues.
And this has nothing to do with post-mortem redistribution, does it?
No, nothing at all.
Double negative?
Is that a true statement, that this has nothing to do with post-mortem redistribution?
That is correct.
Now, in your discussions and simulations of lorazepam, is there any way scientifically to exclude, for example, Michael Jackson swallowing oral lorazepam on his own, or Conrad Murray giving Michael Jackson oral lorazepam to swallow?
They would look the same.
Now, in your chart that you had mentioned, that you had referenced, your simulation contained in People's 222, where you discussed your theory based on the evidence that an infusion line was running and that Michael Jackson stopped breathing and the propofol continued to infuse into his body. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Now, in that simulation, were you designating a precise time that Michael Jackson stopped breathing?
No.
Can you explain what you were demonstrating?
What the simulation shows is how the levels rise initially fast and then rise slowly for a period of time. And the simulation was to show that if Michael Jackson could have died at any time throughout there, with the drug concentration continuing to be high in his blood. And there was no suggestion that he had to die at any specific time. He simply died with a high level of propofol during an infusion, but not at any particular time.
So you were not saying it was precisely at noon or anything of that?
No, not at all.
And when you demonstrated the IV setup with the two infusion lines, that's a fairly typical setup when you would be using two separate lines?
Except we would use a pump, but other than that, yes.
You would use an infusion pump?
That's correct, an infusion pump would be used.
And Dr. White commented on the difficulties of that setup because of the gravitational differences of a bottle, for example, in the saline bag, and then the saline bag with saline solution. can you comment on the how that any difficulty may exist and how you deal with any such difficulty?
If you recall the infusion setup that I showed you, I demonstrated how by controlling the roller clamps, you could have it all be the saline that was coming out or all be the propofol that was coming out simply by the adjustment of the roller clamps. And so in that particular simulation that was set up with the propofol down just a little bit, there's no difficulty controlling how fast each one is running. You do it with the roller clamps.
And that's common and typical? That's how it's done?
No, it's typically done with the proper infusion pump.
Okay, with that qualification.
Correct.
But controlling the roller clamps to control the fluids, that's how these, this plumbing operates.
Correct. If one was infusing an antibiotic in the perioperative period, like right before surgery, you often infuse an antibiotic, and then you engage in exactly this thing with game with the roller clamps where you're adjusting them so that the antibiotic drips in over a few minutes before surgery. So it's commonly done with non-critical things like antibiotics.
Now, and also in your modeling, in your simulations, were the lidocaine levels taken into account?
Yes, they were.
Okay. And are the lidocaine levels found at autopsy in any way inconsistent with your hypothesis?
No, they are not.
And why is that?
Well, the simulations that I did involved lidocaine going in concurrently with the propofol because, according to Dr. Murray's interview, Michael Jackson was very concerned about the pain on injection. It's very simple to simply remove some propofol from the glass vial and replace it with lidocaine. So it's completely consistent.
What is the risk presented by the use of propofol if complications arise? What happens?
The serious risk from propofol is that you stop breathing, either from lack of effort, you don't have a desire to breathe, or because your tongue falls into the back of your throat and your airway obstructs. But that is the main cause of serious injury from infusions of propofol, failure to breathe.
And was it that failure to breathe that eventually led to failure of cardiac activity, what caused Michael Jackson's death in this case, in your opinion?
That's correct. If oxygen is not moving into your lungs, the lungs run out of oxygen, the blood runs out of oxygen, and the heart runs out of oxygen. And it's the lack of oxygen in the heart that kills the heart.
Now, Dr. Shafer, have you had an opportunity to review the simulations presented by Dr. White as it relates to specifically the unchanged propofol in the urine?
Yes, I have.
And you've had an opportunity to research the various literature as it exists today in regard to the amounts that could be found in the urine?
Yes, I have.
And are you aware that the defense simulation relied on a Simons article from 1988?
Yes, I know that article.
And what was the finding of that article?
The Simons article found that there was very little unchanged propofol, so little they didn't actually measure that. What they did instead is they mixed oil, something called cyclohexane, with the urine, knowing the propofol would go into the oil, and then they measured the amount of radioactivity in the oil. But they didn't actually know what they were measuring. There was too little radioactivity to actually determine if it was propofol or if it was a propofol metabolite. There are two specific metabolites that will also go into the oil, and they didn't know which it was. So what that article measured was something called cyclohexane extractable radioactivity, which is not a specific measurement of unchanged propofol.
And what was their conclusion as to an expected measurement percentage?
What they said is that they knew that it had to be less than 0.3%, because that was the upper limit of the amount of radioactivity. But they didn't know how much of that was actually unchanged propofol, because they didn't know what the source was of the radioactivity. It could be propofol or a propofol metabolite that also goes into oil.
So from their stated findings in that 1988 article, isn't it true that it could have been 0.3% all the way down to 0?
That is correct. It could be 0.3% all the way down to 0. In other words, all of the radioactivity might actually have been from a metabolite that goes into oil.
Now, did you, upon learning that Dr. White was relying on that 1988 article, conduct additional research to see if there was newer, more recent research in regard to unchanged propofol in the urine?
Yes, I did.
And were there multiple articles that have been published in respectable journals since that 1988 article?
That is correct.
And was there one particular article that you found to be definitive on this issue?
Yes, the clearest article is a 2002 manuscript.
And is that the article that I'm holding in my hand entitled Investigation of Propofol Renal Elimination by HPLC Using Supported Liquid Membrane Procedure for Sample Preparation?
Yes, it is.
And in this 2002 article, did they specifically address prior research and more specifically address the Simons article from 1988?
Yes. The 2002 article, almost the entire discussion, several paragraphs, is devoted to a description of their paper versus the Simons paper. The Simons paper specifically says what we measured might be the metabolites. That's stated in the Simons paper. This paper says, yes, Simons was right. We've shown that what they measured was the metabolites, and the actual unchanged propofol was much, much less.
And is there a reason why this 2002 article was able to be more precise in these measurements?
Yes, we're looking at, that would be 14 years of additional technology in measuring molecules. So they actually were able to measure these very, very low levels of propofol rather than using radioactivity, which is a much cruder way of performing this kind of measurement because you don't know what the radioactive carbon was. Is it attached to propofol or a metabolite? You can't tell. So here they're actually measuring proper propofol unchanged.
May this article be marked People's next in order, Your Honor? I believe it's 247.
To show it to Mr. Flanagan. 247?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Marked. Thank you.
So based on that improvement in technology, they were able to be more precise in the measurements.
That is correct.
And in this article then, and I'll put it up on the monitor here, did they actually give an amount of unchanged propofol
Yes,
that
it's
they
listed.
suspected would be eliminated?
Well, it's not what they suspected, it's actually what they measured.
And what did they measure?
0.004%.
And that's the unchanged propofol eliminated with urine was approximately 0.004 plus or minus 0.002% of the total applied dose.
That is correct.
And you're aware that the urine found at autopsy, in the urine found at autopsy of Michael Jackson, there was, or are you aware of the number?
Yes,
It was 0.15?
that's my understanding.
0.1
Micrograms per mil.
0.15 micrograms per mil. And the urine in the bladder was 550 milliliters.
Correct.
And so converting that into milligrams, or excuse me,
Into micrograms.
converting that into micrograms, what number do you come up with?
82.5.
Now, in this 2002 article, do they actually have a table, Table 1, where they list out the amount of excreted unchanged propofol and the dosages of propofol that were given to give those amounts?
Yes, that is in Table 2, as I recall.
Let me, Your Honor, have a...
Go ahead, please, Mr. Walsh.
copy of Table 1 from the article, the 2002 article, taken from page 456 of that article. May that be marked People's 248?
Marked.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Shafer, looking at the findings of the 2002 article, again, that specifically had addressed the 1988 Simons article, can you explain what is shown in this total propofol dose in milligrams column and the amount of excreted unchanged propofol column?
Yes. Would you mind moving it to the right so I can just explain the first column?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a study that was done in 5 patients undergoing major surgery. And these 5 patients received continuous infusions of propofol during the surgery. This shows how long the surgery went for. So this person, for example, 160 minutes, 120 minutes, and so on. TCI is how the propofol was given. It stands for target controlled infusion. But the main thing to know is it's the duration of the propofol infusion itself. And you can see that the infusion ran longer than the surgery, which is what you expect. This looks at the total amount of propofol in milligrams that was delivered in each patient. And you can see they're sizable doses, typically running, well, let's see, from a low of about 1,300 milligrams to a high of 3,300 milligrams. The average amount of propofol winds up being 2,000 milligrams. Now that's the volume of the urine, but the thing I want to focus on here is the amount of excreted, unchanged propofol, because that's really the question on the table. Michael Jackson's unchanged propofol in the urine, what does that tell us about the amount of propofol that he received? What you can see here is that the average was 70.71 micrograms of unchanged propofol, which is quite close to what was measured in Michael Jackson, 82.5 micrograms. 70.71 versus 82.5. Very similar. And you can see that that was associated with a dose of 2,000 milligrams.
Dr. Shafer, based on this 2002 article, which you characterize as the definitive article on this subject, in your opinion, does this absolutely rule out the hypothesis put forward by Dr. White?
Absolutely.
And is it consistent with the hypothesis put forward by yourself?
Well, it actually suggests that Michael Jackson received more propofol than suggested by my simulations.
But this is, to be fair, a mean or an average amount?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, on the standard of care, Dr. Shafer, would you agree that any requisite standard of care, either for a hospital setting or an office-based setting, that the need for even for monitoring and safety precautions would be even greater in a home setting?
Yes.
And could you explain that, please?
Yes. Anesthesiologists spend a certain amount of time providing care in what we call remote locations. And a remote location might be a radiology suite where we're not often present, or perhaps a difficult patient in an eye clinic, or a difficult patient in some location where we're normally not giving anesthesia. And what we're taught, and what I now teach, is that when you are in a remote location, you have less tolerance for error. You have to be particularly careful. You have to adhere to the standards as carefully as possible, and the reason is you have no backup. You're by yourself. So in a remote location, the teaching, understandably, is that you take no shortcuts. So to your question, if there were such a thing as bedroom-based anesthesia, the standards would be, the standard guidelines would be considered a minimum because there's no backup. There's no tolerance for error. If you have an error, you'll have a mortality.
Thank you, Dr. Shafer. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination. Mr. Flanagan?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Could I have People's 207? Dr. Shafer, in the report that you wrote in this case, isn't it a fact that you indicated that 5 milliliters of lidocaine injected between the hours of 10 and 12 would correspond with the autopsy levels of lidocaine found in the femoral vein?
I'd have to look at the report again. If you have a copy, I'll be happy to look at it.
Please.
So now that I have the report in front of me, can you repeat your question, please?
Didn't you indicate in the report that you wrote that 5 milliliters of lidocaine injected between the hours of 10 and 12 would correspond with the lidocaine levels found in the femoral blood at autopsy?
No, that's not what the report says.
What does your report say?
The report suggests initially a mixing of 10 of lidocaine, 10 milliliters of lidocaine with 100 milliliters of propofol, and performs a simulation. And the simulation does not give us a high level, and then I suggest that the 10-to-1 ratio was probably wrong, and what the report, if I may actually read from my report, the most likely explanation is that Murray did not use the more or less standard dilutions, this being standard for an anesthesiologist, but rather diluted lidocaine with propofol 1-to-1, i.e., meaning as an example, mixed 5 mils of lidocaine with 5 mils of propofol. But I'm just showing that it's the ratio. I'm not saying that that's what the simulation was. That's just to explain what 1-to-1 means.
And Dr. Shafer, you could probably sit back a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Yes. So that you've misread my report.
Doesn't that sentence, that last sentence actually say that diluted lidocaine with propofol 1-to-1, i.e., mixed 5 milliliters of lidocaine with 5 milliliters of propofol, that would have produced about exactly what the lidocaine concentration measured in femoral blood at autopsy? Is that what, if you complete that whole sentence, is that what it says?
But we're talking about the larger dose. We're not just talking about 5 mils of lidocaine.
Would you read the entire last sentence of that report, starting with
The. Okay.
And sit back just a tad.
Sorry, yeah.
Thank you.
Right. The most likely explanation is that Murray did not use the more or less standard dilution, but rather diluted lidocaine with propofol 1-to-1, i.e., mixed 5 mils of lidocaine with 5 mils of propofol. That would have produced almost exactly the lidocaine concentration measured in the femoral blood at autopsy.
Thank you. Now, you have rejected the Simons article, is that correct?
No, the Simons article is fine. It just has to be properly interpreted. I've rejected your interpretation.
Okay, and that's really what DeWitovitz said, isn't it?
Yes, I've discussed it actually with the principal investigator, Malcolm Rowland, and it's what he said also.
Okay. In the DeWitovitz article, how do I unfreeze? Do I?
Okay, you just press freeze. So you're good.
For the benefit of the reporter and the jurors, you've made reference to an author, Mr. Flanagan, with a W?
Yes,
I didn't catch it.
This is exhibit number 247, the investigation of propofol renal elimination by HPLC using supported liquid membrane procedure for sample preparation by, how do you say that name?
Well, it looks to me like it's derived from David, so I would say DeWittowitz.
Okay, now in this DeWittowitz article, I wonder, doesn't it state in this highlighted portion here, according to Simons et al., only less than 0.3% of the applied propofol dose is excreted into urine in an unchanged form. Their papers are cited by many authors studying the metabolism and elimination of propofol. And then it goes on to distinguish the Simons article by saying, but it should be stressed that the mentioned value was estimated using subanesthetic doses of radiolabeled propofol in healthy volunteers. The aim of the present work is to investigate the amount of propofol excreted into urine in an unchanged form during anesthesia and for the first 48 hours after anesthesia termination. It made a distinction between anesthesia levels and subanesthesia levels, didn't it?
If you're able to.
I'm not sure what your point is. They're simply describing one level as subanesthetic because it was 0.5 milligrams, 0.47 milligrams per kilogram. And in this article, the propofol is being used for anesthesia. That is correct.
In this case, 25 milligrams per, when you reduce it to the same terms, was a 0.4 milligram per kilogram induction, wasn't it?
25. I don't follow your math.
This assumed that Michael Jackson weighed 61.7 kilograms.
Okay.
He was given 25 milligrams. That is 0.4 milligrams per kilogram, isn't it?
I don't have a calculator with me. If you'd like to calculate it.
Well, it's ballpark.
If you'll assert it, that's fine.
Okay. And when it leads to a level of 1 microgram per milliliter, that's subanesthetic, isn't it?
Overall,
In a patient with no other medication on board, perhaps. In a patient with medication on board, hard to make that determination.
Okay. Now, neither one of these articles, Simon or DeWittowitz, was talking about medication, other medication, were they?
In the DeWittowitz paper, if you go back, I believe they received a pre-medicant, but I'm not certain. We'd have to look at the paper.
If I read it, I probably wouldn't understand it anyway. But you will give me the fact that the dosage of 25 milligrams per kilogram is a subanesthetic dose, isn't it?
25 milligrams per kilogram would be an enormous dose.
I mean, 25 milligrams in 61.7 kilograms is a subanesthetic dose.
In most patients, that would be a subanesthetic dose.
Okay. And the Simons article deals with subanesthetic dose. The DeWittowitz deals with anesthetic doses, doesn't it?
The DeWittowitz article definitely deals with doses that are larger, actually by 55 times. They calculate that for us.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Flanagan, thank you. Redirect examination, Mr. Waldron.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Shafer, are the findings from the DeWittowitz article from 2002 in any way dependent on the dose, or is it actually giving a measurement of how much unchanged propofol you'd find in the urine?
What DeWittowitz actually notes in his discussion is that the use of larger doses increases the accuracy of the results. It has no bearing on the 0.004% at all, other than to increase the certainty about that estimate.
Thank you, Dr. Shafer. Thank you, Your Honor.
Walgan, thank you. Mr. Flanagan, recross.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
May Dr. Shafer be excused, Mr. Walgan?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Flanagan?
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Shafer, thank you again. Please remember the prior admonishments. You are excused. May I see counsel? refining a stipulation, which the parties are going to present in just a few moments. So if you wouldn't mind, just give us a few. One of the reasons I request that the attorneys refine a stipulation and make sure that they can reduce it to writing is that frequently when you have one side stipulating, the other side will say, well, how about changing this word? How about changing this word? So we want to try to have it finalized. Is there a final stipulation?
There is, Your Honor.
You may read it.
And this relates to People's Exhibit 52 that may not have been seen for some time, but the stipulation is that People's Exhibit 52 accurately reflects the phone numbers and the names associated with each phone number.
Do the people so stipulate?
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the defense stipulate?
We do.
Thank you. Do you want that stipulation memorialized as 249? I would encourage you to have it written, please.
Yes. How about 52A, Your Honor, since it's associated with that exhibit? Is that okay?
Is that okay with the defense?
Yes, it is.
That stipulation in written form is marked 52A. It's stipulated by the people.
Yes, Your Honor.
By the defense.
It is.
Once again, it's accepted by the court. So 52 accurately reflects the phone number information. 52A and 52 reflect that. Once again, are there any additional witnesses or any additional evidence to be presented by the people, Mr. Walgren?
No, Your Honor.
The people rest their case.
Yes, subject to receipt.
Thank you.
Of exhibits.
And subject to receipt of exhibits, Mr. Chernoff, are there any additional witnesses or evidence on behalf of the defense?
No, Judge.
And subject to receipt and evidence of exhibits, the defense rests its case.
Yes.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, You've seen and heard all of the evidence in this case. When next we meet, I'll be providing you with the list of exhibits, because it's tough trying to follow them, even though you're way ahead of me when it comes to that. But we'll have for you an exhibit list of any and all of the exhibits that actually have been received in evidence in this case. The attorneys have requested that I provide them with a reasonable amount of time in order to prepare their arguments, and that request certainly is a reasonable one. What we're going to be doing outside of your presence is discussing the all-important jury instructions which you will receive, and making a determination of the actual exhibits that have been received in evidence. Those are matters that don't need your attention. Those are matters particularly within our responsibility as the court and as the attorneys. What we're going to do is we're going to excuse you until this coming Thursday at 9 o'clock a.m. The attorneys and I will be discussing in the interim the exhibits and the jury instructions, and the attorneys will be presenting their arguments, so your services aren't required. So we will be in recess on this case until 9 a.m. this coming Thursday, the 3rd of November, 2011. So please bear in mind, and of course follow unhesitatingly, all of these admonishments. Do not discuss this case among yourselves or with anyone else, or form or express any opinions about the case until it is submitted finally to you. Do not visit any scene or location that may have been referenced, mentioned, or involved in the case. Don't perform any experiments, or on your own or through another person, conduct any independent research or investigation on any topics, subjects, or persons mentioned or involved in this case. Do not listen to, see, or hear any television or radio programs, newspaper or magazine articles, books, or the Internet regarding any of these topics or subjects or persons. Have no contact with any of these information sources. Do not access, on your own or through another person, any Internet website, including but not limited to any social networking site, such as MySpace or Facebook, or any information website, such as Google, Ask, or Bing, or text or tweet anything about the case, or access any blogs or post any messages on any sites whatsoever. Do not have any contact or communication by any electronic communication device, including but not limited to any cell phone. Do not come in contact or have any communication with the defendant, the attorneys, the witnesses, or spectators. If anyone contacts you or tries to contact you in any way, either in person, in writing, by telephone, by email, by cell phone, post any messages on any of those types of devices, immediately cease any such encounter or contact and immediately notify the court staff. Do all of you continue to assure and promise us that you will follow not only the written admonishments which I gave to each of you, but also my continuing verbal admonishments, all indicating in the affirmative. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to ask that you join us this coming Thursday, the 3rd of November, 2011, at 9 a.m. for further proceedings in this case. Have a good day to get back to all important work responsibilities and personal responsibilities, and we'll see you on Thursday morning. Good day. Thank you.